Good afternoon. Hello, my name is Heino Schmid. I'm going to read from a script for a second. Welcome to our third and final virtual artist talk. Today I'm speaking with Kachelle Knowles to discuss the breadth and depth of her process in creating her works for this exhibition. The Artist on Artist talk is a series that situates two artists, one exhibiting artist and one interviewer, in dialogue based on the commonalities and differences in theory and/or praxis of each artist's practice. Through an investigation of each other's practices, this series will provide further insight and context to their processes and approaches to art making. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Kachelle.
Hey, I know.
All right, let's begin. So I have a few personal questions, but I was also asked to ask you some formal questions, I think, which are actually quite good. I'm curious about the answers. So you are in this exhibition, and in keeping with your mission of exploring ideas of gender identity and social relations within the Black community, how did you think to push your practice this time when interpreting the exhibition's title? And just in case you don't know what the title is, it's To Scatter Seeds, and it's an exhibition including Kachelle Knowles, Sydney Jasmine Colby, and Jody Minnis.
Hey, to be honest, when we first came up with the title, it scattered me, man. I was all over the place. I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? So with conversation between Sydney and Jody, we started talking about like the diaspora. How do we like carry on lineage? How do we take, the metaphor of like the seed and kind of grow into something that's like new? So for me, I kind of took that metaphor and started talking about the differences between my school life growing up versus like this kind of like new Gen Z culture. So some of the works are millennials in their kind of like schoolboy fashion, and then the other works are very Gen Z.
What's the difference to you? I know. What do you mean by that? Like in terms of your work, like how do you identify the difference between millennials and Gen Zs? Like in your work?
I feel like for me, I'm able to remember like a lot of like the fashion sense, a lot of the brands that we were wearing, like for us, like our clothes are like super baggy and like super like stiff, and certain like commonalities of like how men used to like wear their like shirts like super like pinned up to the neck, or the tucked in sort of like pants. But like the Gen Z now, like the clothing is super fitted, like super fitted shirts and pants. I find that tools are becoming a little bit more acceptable in terms of like allowing them to wear brands, like having like a Tommy shirt with like the little small like Tommy logo, versus like for us, they were like no brands. Like you could not show like the logo, because they thought it was sort of like it was like a risk to the students. They thought that it was like a distraction. They thought that it was like, oh, because we had like students that used to catch bus, and so they would kind of look at your outfit and kind of like clock that, oh, you're wearing Dickies, you're wearing a Tommy, you're wearing a Land, oh, you have some money. So they thought that it was a distraction for students. So they were like, hey, if you're wearing a Dickies pants, they're gonna see me rip that tag off your pants, which I found so ridiculous. But for kids now, it's like, they are able to wear, their Tommy shirts, they're able to wear like the Tommy belt, they're able to wear like their polo belts. And I'm like, man, they're getting away with a lot. But I feel like the relationship of them kind of being this like, sort of like loving their parents and loving the way that they carry themselves is very similar to like, the millennials of us trying to be like individuals, us trying to be like, personable, or while all of us are wearing like the school uniform, but still being like, oh, this bag tells you who I am, or this belt tells you like what kind of person that I'm trying to be, which is a little bit cooler or a little bit like fancier.
So in case we have any international kind of viewers or listeners, so our school system here is very like uniform based. So you have to find like little tricks to kind of create identifiers in your work. You kind of leave the tags on your shoes or somewhere I guess now, like you're saying, I noticed that as well. There's a lot of like clock tags from shoes, and just like little moments like in the belts and all of these accessories that kind of position you socially, like in the school. I do remember vaguely. I'm a lot older than you, but I vaguely remember that in school as well, like in with like little ways, like you'd have a little bit of jewelry, and then suddenly, when the bell rang, you'd stick it in your
you'd hide it.
you'd hide it when the bell rang. So you're like looking at that quite a bit as well in your work. Then there's those like moments of identifiers, and specifically with males, right? Like, and it's not just for this show. It's like it's been the male body has been a huge source of fodder for your practice. I feel like for a number of years now, right?
Yeah, I say I've been working with the male figure, I would say, for the last 10 years or so.
Okay. Why? And what gives you like what gives you like the
authority to speak on matters?
Like authority is a good word, because I mean you do it authoritatively. Like they're really positioned quite actively, and it's a specific kind of male, not older, like a lot younger, school aged. I recommend anybody to go check your website. You can see this consistency in there, and there's a lot of authority in your presentation in it. And I was gonna next question, answer the first one first, but next question, just to bounce off of that, is like the gaze that is happening in the show. You don't always have it in your work. Like sometimes the swimmers and the ball players and some of the other works that you've done in the last year or two or three just showed young men in action. But specifically, unless I'm mistaken, there's a direct gaze, I think, of the male subject to the viewer in all the works in this exhibition. So that'd be the second part of the question, like why so authoritatively the male, and why so like again with authority the male gaze. Like
I always go back to my childhood and my experiences of just kind of growing up with a lot of men in my life, being close with my dad, my brother, having male best friends, and kind of growing up through that eyes of just being so always close to like a male person. And for me, when I'm looking at art, and even just kind of like looking in everyday life, I just found myself so fascinated by like how men like act and move and the things they get away with, and the conversations that we're not having about like the way that men carry themselves, the way that they kind of say certain things but then do the direct opposite, the way that the fashion and even just the culture is changing so quickly. And I feel like the best way for me to kind of like have that conversation is to visually dictate that, especially with our art form where so much of Bahamian art has been relegated to the landscape. And even with the figures that we tend to use, they're very like, the old lady or the taxi driver, or like the lady with the basket, or that this kind of like native individual that always tends to be like a kind of older mature person, or tends to be a very, very young like child, being like the little native boy, the little native girl. So for me, I felt like it was important to kind of like capture like what's actually happening within the culture in this kind of contemporary way.
If I could interrupt, like I mean, you say culture, like the way you're trying to treat the body, and I've noticed this. I've had the privilege of seeing your studio is very close to mine, so right next door actually. So I've had the privilege of seeing you work in this way pretty aggressively, and you're saying culture, but the way, at least for me as a viewer, you treat the body and the male body almost like a subculture, like how some people would. Have you ever thought about it that way, or do you understand like maybe what I'm asking? It's sort of like it's not quite a National Geographic vibe, but it's like if you were to go and look at something almost tribal or outside of a familiar context, like you go like on vacation, you take a picture, like you know what I mean, of the natives being restless, whatever that means. It seems like almost like a subculture of, of a person, of a type of person, of a people. I don't know if I'm asking the question clearly, but
I know what you mean.
Okay.
Yeah, that is exactly what I'm doing. Like when I think of like, for example, my school experience, and I'm thinking about those boys who had their shirts like pinned and tucked up, like that wasn't everybody.
Okay.
But I feel like those are these kind of like nuances where I'm like, wow, nobody's having a conversation on like the kind of vanity that men go through in school of these particulars, these, you know, men carrying like pocket mirrors, not necessarily to be
I do remember
sexual, but also like they also have kind of have this like gaze towards themselves of I need to look a certain way, I need to make sure my face isn't shiny. But then there's this kind of like pocket mirror is such a feminine thing to carry versus like the red sponges. Like guys just start carrying red sponges because towels were considered like distracting. Like guys used to like spank each other with the towels or like, hey, no more towels in school. So like, man, I gotta take care of myself. And where do you guys, where do you girls get these sponges from? And they just kind of like collect these things that aren't necessarily feminine anymore because they just want it for the purpose of I'm just trying to take care of myself as a guy.
Okay.
Like screw the attachment of what this thing is. So I feel like yes, I am kind of like peeking into these kind of like subcultures of what's happening like within the country. Like a lot of this stuff isn't, a lot of this isn't general. So I can say that it is these kind of like pockets of, oh, I knew a friend like that, or oh, I knew a guy like that, or oh yeah, like my friend, or oh wow, I used to be that person. So definitely.
Okay.
And I forgot the second question.
The gaze. So every figure is looking back at me, and I always find that quite interesting. Yeah, because it's again with authority. It's a very authoritative, equal gaze. Assertive, I think.
I don't know when I started kind of like focusing on the gaze per se, but I can say that making work while being off at school. I went to school at Emily Carr University in Design in Vancouver, Canada, and the Black population is below 1%, and that's for the city and the country, not necessarily the school that I'm in. So I felt like a lot of the works that I was presenting, I was like one of the only Black people in my school, in my class, in my illustration class, and I felt like the way that people would engage with the work, I felt like they were very scared. They're very afraid. They're very scared. They didn't want to be offensive.
To you mean like?
Yeah,
Okay.
like, and I don't know if it was race, or I don't know if it was just the subject matter, but I just always found it like this sort of like interesting way of having like multiple like people in my class from like Japanese to Korean to people from like Poland. And so for me, it's like I felt like I didn't need too much information to at least get into everybody else's work versus like I feel like for me everything was very surface level. It was like, oh, it was like technique, like, oh, I like your technique, I like your shading, I like the patterns, but they couldn't really engage with the work. So for me, I always was very careful about how I present male bodies. Like I am very aware of like the history of the Black body, and I never wanted to be violent. I never wanted to be overly sexual. I never wanted to be what's the word? I never
fetishized, but it doesn't feel like a fetish.
Yeah, like or when people look at certain works and they're like, man, this person looks so angry, or this person looks so. I never wanted the audience to feel like that, so I feel like I pay very close attention to how I composite the work, how I pose, how I allow the viewer to kind of like engage, so that there's this kind of like ease to it. So I feel like that's kind of how I focus on like the gaze in a sense, where I just want the person to be sort of like as not calm, as disarming as possible.
Okay.
Yeah. And then that allows me to kind of feed into my own like biases of like, oh well, how do I see Black men? Like, how does this look disarming to me? Or if I would approach somebody and I want them to like pose, like, are they gonna pose in a way that to me looks a little like suggestive, or looks too violent, or like I always kind of pay attention to that. And I don't know if as a woman I'm seeing them differently versus that versus like how they present to me, because I feel like men tend to present a little bit more gently to women than to other men.
True.
Yeah.
That's very true. And the age group, do you think, I know that's something that's specific to your own memories of school and stuff, do you think that like helps? Do you know what I mean? Like everything seems roughly between 14 to 18 in that vibe. It's not like 27-year-olds like in that space, which I think can, with a direct gaze, it doesn't even matter the race, is always like projected. Maybe because I'm a male, I always assume when somebody's looking at me, I was like, do I owe you money? Like, what are we doing? You know? Like that can be slightly more violent. Is there something, violence is too strong a word, but for lack of Is there something in like the age group that's also allowing you to kind of do this as you're getting older, like, and you're approaching like younger dudes to like pose for you? Like, do you? I mean, I think you probably are a little older than you look, but like, is that something that's part of your work? That's like, I think I'm getting into the weeds and a bit of nuance now, but like, is that something that you're thinking about? Is there something that in there that's changing it? Like, as you're maturing, the age group of your models are roughly staying the same. Like you said, like within the 10-year period that you've been working with them, you're 10 years older, but your age group of models is roughly the same. You're kind of thinking about that same period of life, it sounds like, of when you were in school and the nuances that have evolved, but for the same age group. Like, is that something that you think about in your practice or influences, or is it just something you know, is just a fact of life kind of thing?
Not necessarily. I do notice that when I am approaching like younger kids, they're very shy. Versus if I am approaching like somebody like older my age, they're very like proud. They're like, oh yeah, you wanna use me for some art? Like, oh yeah, like get like they're ready to go. Like, oh yeah, get my good side.
There.
And
Which I think is a title, isn't it? The title of your work is My Good Side or something, or Catch My Good Side. I feel like something along those lines. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Sorry to interrupt.
no. I think it's a C.H. Reeve piece. Make sure you catch the whole fit.
Oh right.
Sure
Okay. Yeah. I know something along those lines. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
If with this particular series, the people are all between the age of 15 to 18, but I have made works with like older people, not older in the sense of like older than me, but kind of like mid-range, 20s, 30s. I haven't done any work older than that. But for me, I feel like it just depends on the subject of what I'm doing. Like the kind of like if I'm making work about like how I did like the safe space work where you have guys who tend to go to spaces to feel like themselves, feel like they're in a space to kind of like I guess like do whatever they want. So like basketball, smoking, that kind of like bar culture, like those kind of spaces. Of course, you're not going to see like a 16-year-old boy there.
Sure.
But I think it just depends on like the subject. Will just determine the subject will determine like the subject of the people.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I think. Oh, there was a question I was also asked to ask you about the titles. How are the titles of your work for the exhibition pushing towards or against your own definitions of the terms scatter and seed? I think it's going back to the title of the exhibition.
Okay. I don't think I was thinking about the titles when I thought about the title.
Okay.
Yeah, because for me, every time I make work, the titles come after the work.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair.
They almost always come after the work.
That's
Sometimes
fair.
I have titles where I'm like, ooh, I don't want to name this work that because the title sounds like a title of a show.
I see. Yeah.
So sometimes I hold off on titling certain works. I'm like, ooh, this is a good one. Let me save this. But usually, sometimes it's inspired by the notion of what I want to get through with the work, or like I've named work after songs before. For me, my intention is to give people kind of like a secondary platform of understanding the work because I'm very aware of a lot of the audience that I have aren't local, aren't Bahamian. So I feel like sometimes they just need sort of like an extra like air of context to sort of like push the work.
I mean, it's super helpful because I think a lot of the work, especially for this show, rightfully so, I think has a lot of like stoicism, which I think is like a big part of the work. Is like the figures are presented very center and on the page. You know, there's direct gaze to the viewer. So I think some of the like, so I'll just read out a couple of them, I guess. If I could say, like West Side for show, and hold on. Oh, only airbrush junkies could do it like this. Like these very kind of like long titles, and some of them are quite short as well. But yeah, okay. I mean, that makes sense. I think a lot of artists do the same. I do the same thing. I have a book, and I just write things as they come to me. And sometimes I'm just like, if I'm struggling for a title, I just look through them. I was like, oh, that's why I wrote that down. It's a perfect fit. It helps. So that's good.
Do you have your titles based off the work that you're making now? You're just writing titles.
I just write titles down, and
Mm.
sometimes I never illustrate the title. I'm not just to be self-deprecating, but like I don't think I'm talented enough to like do that. I don't find it helpful. Like I always just like I don't personally I don't like titles like for exhibitions beforehand or when there's call for like national I don't read any of that stuff
I know.
because I don't know how to do it. So I just write stuff down and then I just have a long list, and if I'm struggling to come up with something, I just kind of go through it, and it's always immediate. If there's a right one, it always it's like immediate. I'm like, okay. So I don't know if it's like an indirect illustration of a thing, but whatever way, like that process works for me. So I get that. I get what you're saying as well. All right, last one for the formal questions. What has been something interesting you've discovered? Oh, I had one similar to this. In your approach to material usage in the creation of the works, and how has this contributed to the themes you are exploring in the works? Can I repeat that?
Yeah,
I don't think
please.
I read that well. What has been something interesting you've discovered in your approach to the material usage in the creation of the works, and how has that contributed to the themes you are exploring? So how is your themes and your linked to your material, and vice versa? Does one affect the other, or which one affect? Is it the material that affects the theme, or is the theme that affects the material?
Hmm. That's a hard one because I don't think I think too hard on how the theme is affecting the material. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. I'm just working with the same materials that I have now. I think I have a list of materials that I tend to use, and then sometimes I'm like doing like a process of elimination. Sometimes I look at a work and I'm like, can I get away with some stitching in this, or stitching too much? I'm like, oh, can I use like a little heavier material in this work to kind of like illustrate like a backpack, or like the heavy material of like, let's say like a belt or like a shoe. Like I would kind of think of like the actual object that's in the work itself and see how the material can kind of like better
Okay.
shape or illustrate that. So like for example, the only airbrush junkies work, the backpack that's in that work is like that kind of like classic. I can't remember the name of it, but like so many people had this like leather backpack, and it was like the backpack to wear, and they would like take the stitching off of the pouch in the front, and then they would airbrush the whole front. So like with that bag, I wanted to make sure, I wanted to get the aesthetic of the airbrush look, but also the material of itself. Like I wanted to kind of mimic that like leather, leather look. So I think about stuff like that, like how do I better illustrate the medium that's in the work to sort of make it look a little bit more realistic. I'm not super interested in like realism, but I feel like those kind of like nuances help the push and play with my work of that like super flat, super illustrated versus like that like, oh, this has like a lot of like dimension.
Yeah, because I was looking at just to flatter you some. Let me see if I can find the title of the work. It's actually, I could ask you. This is one I'm looking on right over here because as you're talking about, what was it?
Make sure you catch the whole fit.
Make sure you catch the whole fit. Hopefully that'll jump up on the screen because I was looking at this, and I think even at the opening, I was looking at the top and the shirt and the pants and the way that the lines, for example, and the pants kind of fit in that diagonal kind of push. Works really well with that slight foreshortening that's happening. So like the material itself just has that practical kind of quality for you. It's just like whatever helps in the okay. All right, in the positioning of the body in space. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just kind of playing with the pattern, as opposed to like having to physically paint a form that has shadow, that has weight. I feel like the eyes sort of get tricked into seeing those things
Okay.
Automatically.
Yeah, no, it works really, really well, and that land belt is amazing. All right. So we got a pile of pages here. So I also wanted to ask you just some personal questions just around the work. I think we touched quite a bit about some of the practicalities in terms of what you were working on and just how you work as well. Maybe you can get a little esoteric just for a second as we wind down. Um, I'm not going to ask you this best piece of advice thing. uh, what has been a seminal experience in your life and or practice? Like what is it that you look at that um, helps you come to the studio every day, grind in a very meticulous way. You're one of the few people that I know that still has this very meticulous hand in Nassau Bahamas. Like I think, especially artists of my generation, I keep hitting my mic, sorry. Artists of my generation just have a slightly more, well, not even just, you work in a very mixed media format, but like in a way that medium um, kind of collides with subject matter in a very aggressive way. You seem to have a very kind of meticulous way of producing your work, and I'm just curious as to like where that comes from. There was like a seminal bit of a seminal moment for you when you sat down and was like, "This is my work." Something that you can refer back to for yourself that might be helpful to share with others. Whereas like, no, this is the path that the trajectory started like from here and has led me to where, where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that comes to mind per se?
Man,
That's a big question. I
it
apologize.
is because I feel like I've always been like thinking about art, but I feel like I've been trained in a different way to approach art. I felt like being in the university with the teachers that I've had, I feel like all of you guys, from Sue Bennett to you to John, always had sort of like an alternative approach in terms of how you do art. It's like, oh, the medium doesn't matter, the idea matters, and you need certain mediums to do the idea. So you would switch from, oh, the medium requires like graphite or charcoal, and you're like, oh, this idea now requires photography. Now I have to photograph this as an art piece. I feel like that kind of like made the switch in my brain to say, what is like the most effective way to do this idea? And I feel like I just kind of went back to my strengths and what I like, which is drawing.
Mm.
So that's why I kind of like drawing is like the main focus of the work, and discovering that I like people. I like people. I love the stories. I like speaking to people. And I feel like that is just sort of like coming out in the work itself. And then using collage was kind of like an easy way for me to not paint. I hate painting.
Right.
I feel like some artists just need to figure out what their niche is and what their niche isn't. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, I don't like to paint. What other way can I find that can give me the colors, give me the dimension, so that I can kind of work with what I'm seeing in my head without having to learn how to paint again.
That makes perfect sense to me. I think like if you are true painters, and God bless them, but like the history of painting can be so oppressive. Like it really is. Like whereas drawing as an art form, as a final art form, is there's something always preliminary about drawing in people's minds that I think provides a freedom.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I didn't do it in
yeah.
university, because I wanted to take up drawing, but I had that same mindset of like, oh, I don't like if people gonna look down on me because I'm getting a bachelor's in drawing, because I feel like to me having it as a major felt so limiting because I wanted to work with so much other things.
No, that's fair.
So I ended up doing like illustration, because
I was gonna ask you that is
yeah, because it's all about the story rather than the medium.
Okay.
So I'm like, oh, I could work it whatever I want.
So I mean, going to that was my next question. It was like, so you got your degree in illustration. There's something very obviously illustrative about the work that you do. In terms of because I'm a professor at the University of the Bahamas, and I teach there, and I've noticed in the last, say, 5 years, especially maybe longer, and something I've struggled with like the painting classes and drawing classes that I've had, is that the emphasis, there seems to be like a switch in fine art, whatever you air quotes fine art. Again, the history of painting, there some kind of confusion's too strong a word, but in the interest of time, like a confusion between, say, a painting and an illustration. I've seen like a lot of people attempt to make a painting, but with so much storytelling and so much narrative. Where I'm just like, do you understand that this is an illustration, not necessarily a painting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you ever think about in terms of like your history of, I would assume, the history of illustration in your work and how you kind of place yourself in a fine art environment, or is it not?
What are you asking?
So maybe it's too specific to the classrooms that I'm in. I've noticed that there are people, students that I have focus on artworks as illustration. Like we don't have an illustration program, but everything I kind of see in a critique seems to be very much like an illustration. I've been trying to wrap my head around it. I think it's like the onslaught of information, like social media, whatever, that very boring conversation. But if people are just bombarded by information, so they're trying to get a point across, like in a very like aggressive way.
So they're trying to like find meaning in
Exactly,
every
a single thing, and there's like no nuance, nothing. There's no abstraction at all, no non-representation, no real investigation of medium. It's just getting the story across. Like this work is about this. Is that something you struggled with in your own practice? Maybe that's a better way to deal with it. Like coming out of a degree of illustration. I know you and I think LeVar Monroe is the only other person I know that studied illustration. I know he's figured out his path, like in a way that's.
I think John did too.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. John Cox as well. Is that something you ever had to struggle with at all? Like, you know, do you like overwhelmed by the narrative of the thing or the need to explain the narrative?
No.
No. Okay.
Only because
that was a long question for a short answer. I appreciate that. No,
tell me. Answer. Only because I'm always starting with the narrative.
Okay.
I'm always starting with the narrative. And I think that understanding, like, I think art history helps to contextualize, like, meanings of color, meanings of form, like what do these things mean when you include them in your work? And I feel like that kind of helps dictate what's too much and what's not too much.
Okay.
I feel like you don't need to have too much information for people to kind of understand like what's going on in the work. And also there should be some kind of freedom to allow people to use their brain and and explore the work for what it is. Like speaking to my work, like I realized that a lot of people place my figures in multiple spaces without having to understand or contextualize that I'm making work about Black men in the Caribbean.
I see.
And I feel like I like that because I don't want, if I'm having like work and people feel like, oh, you know, I need a palm tree, I need something to sort of like, oh, this is about Black work in the Caribbean, which is necessarily not the case. Like people can relate to the work, people can see themselves in the work. Like I've had people who seen the work and be like, wow, this reminds me of growing up in Kenya. We were wearing school uniforms. So
no, you minimize the landscape like pretty aggressively.
Yeah. For the benefit of me, because sometimes people contextualize work within a space too much.
Got it.
If they have too much information. So I kind of like the freedom of being very selective about what I'm using, being very selective about just kind of like these nuances of, you know, patterns and this color and this brand, and then allow people to just come to their own conclusion. Like
smart, I get that.
There's only so much of art you can over explain.
Yeah.
Because someone's always going to see something and be like, oh, but I recognize that from Korea. And you're like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. So like, there's always going to be like interpretation. So I feel like it depends on how they get into it. Like if they're trying to, they just sound lost. They don't sound like the intention is to make the work as like you're trying to over explain the point you're making. And then if you do like a dry critique and say, okay, John put his work up on the wall. You can't speak about it. Everybody say what you feel about this work.
Fair enough.
Is that going to be properly articulated by your audience? Did you succeed in all this information you decided to put in the work?
Maybe I'll have you come in one day next semester. But that makes a lot of sense. So thank you very much. So I'll just have one more question. What is or what would be your dream project? This is the thing that keeps you up at night.
Oh, what's my dream project? I have one in mind. I don't want to speak on it because people will take ideas.
Fair enough.
But I do want to do like a installation, like a room installation, in terms of like floor work, wall work, sculptures, and like how people come into the show like dressed. like specifically for the nature of the show.
Ah, that sounds amazing. Well,
Yeah.
don't say
Yeah,
less. Say less.
I have it. I have
Say
it.
less. That
I have
sounds
the
awesome.
whole idea in my mind. I have the location. If National Art Gallery is ready and able, that room I have the idea. But
that sounds really cool.
yeah, and I feel like I've been inspired by. Have you ever been to the exhibition that Dylan and Dee Dee did? It was like about sweets. They did a pop up where they had this like interactive work, and then like you had a cake, and then some of the work was made of sugar, and I was like, this is the most amazing exhibition I've ever been to.
Shout out Dylan Rappiard and Dee Dee Brown. Yeah,
it was so fun, and
that's like 20 years ago almost. That's very cool.
But I feel like there's been so many shows where I've been so like engaged with not just the work, but just like the whole theme of it, like going into the space and being like, wow, I've had a great time just being in the space and enjoying the work as the artist intended. And I feel like more people don't do that.
That is true. That is very true.
And I feel like sometimes the spaces become so stiff, whereas like no one's having like fun.
You're gonna bring the fun back.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, man.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it there unless you wanted to add something else.
Nope.
Well, if you can, come see the exhibition. Let me just double check the dates. It is running until May 17th. So you only got a few days left.
No, I think it's running until Transforming Spaces. So the 17th and the 18th.
Yeah, and the 18th. My apologies. Yeah, come check it out. Just get a seat. So Kachelle is showing with Sydney Colby and Jody Minnis. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk to you.
Thanks, Heino.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Yeah. Oh, I'm so nervous.
That was only 40 minutes.